There's a story whispered around certain neuroscience departments, the kind of story no one wants to put on paper because it sounds impossible. It begins with a forgotten EEG file, sealed in a university's basement archive. A simple meditation study from the 1990s. 2 volunteers in different rooms. No talking, no interaction, no sensory connection of any kind. And yet, when a graduate student reopened the file decades later, both brains suddenly sync, perfectly, for almost 12 seconds, as if the 2 minds were sharing something neither of them should have been able to access. People said it had to be an equipment glitch, a calibration error, a technician's mistake, but the signatures matched too cleanly, a type of gamma synchrony seen only in moments of deep internal focus or profound connection. And the student who found the file, he left the program 1 semester later saying only,
"We're studying the brain, but something else is slipping through."
Now, is any of that proof of a universal consciousness? No, but it raises a question that refuses to die. What if the brain isn't generating consciousness, but receiving it? If you walk into any modern neuroscience lab and ask whether consciousness comes from the brain, you'll hear a confident yes. It's the scientific consensus. It's clean, it's testable, and it fits our current understanding of biology. But walk into almost any ancient spiritual tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, Stoic philosophy, Jewish mysticism, indigenous cosmologies, and they'll tell you something radically different. That consciousness is fundamental, that the brain is not the source, but the interface, a receiver, a translator, a tuning mechanism that filters a much larger field of awareness into a human experience. And between those 2 poles, the measurable and the mysterious, is where today's story lives. Let's start with a question most of us don't think to ask. If consciousness comes from the brain, why does consciousness feel bigger than the brain? Why does it feel spacious? Why does it feel like I am the one observing thoughts instead of being identical to them? This idea that consciousness is not confined to the skull is ancient. In Hindu philosophy, the Upanishads describe Brahman, the universal consciousness from which individual minds arise like waves from the ocean. You are not the wave. They say, you are the ocean pretending to be a wave for a little while. In Tibetan Buddhism, they speak of Rigpa, primordial awareness, something that exists before thought, before identity, before sensation. The brain, in this view, doesn't create awareness. It focuses it, shapes it, limits it to a survivable human format. And in Western esoteric traditions, from Hermeticism to Emerson's Transcendentalists, the same idea keeps resurfacing, that consciousness is shared, a field rather than an object. Which brings us back to that old EEG file, because if consciousness is a field, then maybe moments of synchrony are hints of that field becoming visible. Jump forward a few millennia, and you reach Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst who dared to suggest that the human mind contains more than just personal memories. He argued that deep beneath your individual experiences is a collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of symbols, instincts, and archetypes. Think of how every culture independently produced hero myths, mother goddesses, trickster figures, flood stories. Jung didn't believe that was coincidence. He believed humanity has a shared psychological blueprint, not learned but inherited. Now, was he saying that humans share a literal universal mind? Not exactly, but he was nudging toward it, implying that our minds are not as separate as they appear, and that consciousness has layers we don't yet understand. And here's the part that still unsettles psychologists today. Jung thought these deeper layers weren't just passive storage systems. He thought they were alive, dynamic, guiding, influencing us in ways we barely perceive. A modern neuroscientist would say that's metaphor. But the question remains, why does the human mind seem to tap into ideas, patterns, and symbols that no one taught it? In the 1980s, biologist Rupert Sheldrake proposed something even more controversial: morphic resonance, the idea that living things inherit not just genetics, but patterns, behaviors, forms, memories, through a kind of invisible field. According to Sheldrake, once one member of a species learns something, it becomes slightly easier for others to learn it too. It's as if information isn't just stored in brains, but in a shared field that the brain can tune into. Now, mainstream science rejects this.
This alignment proves the hypothesis beyond a doubt. The reaction rate increases exponentially.
Exponentially? That flies in the face of everything we know about these structures.
There's no confirmed mechanism, and there's no hard evidence that consciousness can act across distances. But the idea refuses to die because it resonates with something people have always felt intuitively: that thoughts, emotions, and even memories can sometimes seem to ripple beyond the individual. And again, we're not saying this is proven. We're saying it's one of the theories that refuses to disappear. One of the outliers that keeps pushing the boundaries of what consciousness might be. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about what the mainstream scientific theories of consciousness say. And here's where things get both more grounded and more puzzling. Most leading neuroscientists believe consciousness emerges from the brain's ability to process and integrate information, not from a universal field, not from quantum magic, but from neurons firing in complex patterns. Two major theories dominate the conversation. One, global workspace theory. This theory says that consciousness happens when information becomes globally available across the brain, like spotlighting a single actor on a dark stage. When a thought or sensation is broadcast across the neural network, you become consciously aware of it. 2. Integrated information theory. This one argues that consciousness is the amount of information a system can unify into a single, coherent experience. Consciousness is a measure, a quantifiable property, and the brain scores high because it integrates extremely complex data. Both models treat consciousness as generated by the brain, not received, not shared, not universal. But here's the catch. Neither theory nor any other can explain why consciousness feels like anything at all. They can describe the mechanics. They cannot explain the experience, the inner movie, the sense of I am. Science can measure brain activity, but it cannot measure awareness. Not yet. Let's talk experiments. Has neuroscience found evidence of a universal consciousness? No. Has it found evidence that consciousness can exist outside the brain? Also no. But, and this is the important part, it has found evidence that human brains can synchronize in surprising ways. Synchrony in deep social connection. When two people talk deeply, not small talk but emotionally connected communication, their brainwaves begin to align. This is called neural synchrony, and it's measurable. Large groups chanting, singing, or dancing also show synchrony. It's why crowds feel unified. Their brains literally begin firing together. When people work together toward a shared goal, their brains often coordinate activities long before they consciously do. And then there's the cutting-edge, slightly unsettling part: brain-to-brain interfaces. Scientists have already connected human brains using non-invasive technology. In one study, 3 people played a Tetris-like game using only thought. The brains communicated through EEG and magnetic stimulation. It wasn't a mystical mind meld. It wasn't telepathy. But it was proof that shared mental states, at least at a basic level, are technologically possible. And that's where things get interesting. Because if technology can link minds, who's to say biology never did? Here's where modern science tiptoes into territory that starts looking suspiciously like ancient philosophy. Quantum consciousness. Some physicists, including Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, believe quantum processes inside neurons might be involved in generating consciousness. Mainstream science is skeptical, but the idea raises a question. If consciousness has quantum properties, could it extend beyond the brain? Information theory. In computer science, information is not tied to any specific physical form. So some theorists ask, if consciousness is a form of information, could it exist outside the brain just as software exists outside a specific computer? Collective intelligence in AI and networks. AI systems already show forms of distributed cognition. No single unit thinks alone. And swarm intelligence in animals, birds flocking, ants working, bees navigating, shows that intelligence can emerge from groups, not just individuals. These fields don't prove universal consciousness, but they hint that mind-like properties can emerge in ways we don't fully understand yet. Let's return to the idea from the start of the video. The idea that the brain might be a receiver, not a generator. This concept is known as the filter theory of consciousness. Proposed by William James, expanded by Aldous Huxley, and embraced by many philosophers of mind, the idea is simple. The brain doesn't create consciousness, it restricts it. Under this model, consciousness is like white light, vast, infinite, unbounded, and the brain is like a prism, filtering that light into the narrow band we call human experience. Is it true? We don't know. Is it compatible with mainstream neuroscience? Not really. But here's the part scientists can't explain away. If the brain creates consciousness, why does reducing brain activity through anesthesia, psychedelics, or near-death states sometimes expand conscious experience? Why do people with diminished brain function sometimes report the most vivid awareness? We don't have answers, just questions, and that's what makes the subject so electrifying. Let's return for a moment to that sealed EEG file. Two brains in separate rooms, no sensory contact, both entering a meditative state. And for 12 seconds, perfect gamma synchrony. Was it a glitch? Probably. Was it proof of universal consciousness? No. Was it something we don't yet understand? Absolutely. And that's the point. Every field of science has moments like this, anomalies that don't fit the model but refuse to disappear. Consciousness may be the final frontier because it is the one thing in the universe that cannot be observed from the outside. We can measure brain waves. We can track signals, but the actual experience, the awareness, is invisible. Maybe consciousness is the universe experiencing itself. Maybe it's a biological illusion. Maybe it's a field we're only beginning to sense. Or maybe, like the student said, we're studying the brain, but something else is slipping through. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know how the brain produces it, or if it produces it at all. We don't know whether your mind ends at your skull, or whether it stretches into something larger, something shared, something ancient. What we do know is that humanity has been asking the same question for thousands of years, from the Vedas to Jung to modern neuroscience. What if consciousness is bigger than us? What if we're all connected? What if the brain is not the source, but the doorway? Whatever the answer is, it will change everything. Our identity, our society, our technology, our understanding of what it means to be alive. And maybe, just maybe, the next unopened file in some forgotten basement will be the one that finally cracks the mystery.